Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning. Morning.
We're so pleased to be here. I am Allison Rockefeller, and I am the founding chair of National Audubon's Women in Conservation program. And we're thrilled to be here today at the Hewitt School with Mr. Weaver being our great contact here. It's been a pleasure working with him and with the school and with the students that we've met. It's been an excellent experience. And this is our premier spring panel on the subject of women leaders in the conservation movement, in the environmental movement. National Audubon is a 100-year-old organization. It was started by 4 women in Boston 100 years ago. It has progressed into one of the most influential, largest, venerable conservation organizations in the world. There are 500 members in the United States and 500 chapters. Tremendous spread and tremendous influence. The Women in Conservation program was started 6 years ago. Its purpose is to reach out to young women and girls like yourselves, to introduce you, to connect you to the tremendous energy of women leaders in the environmental movement. And we're very hopeful that a morning like today will inspire you to play your role, whatever that might be, in our sustainable future. Just quickly, 35 years ago, not unlike this room, I was a 15-year-old, and in morning chapel, or assembly, and our head of school, besides going through the very boring schedules of exams and debate club and practices, talked about a special woman. And this woman that morning entered my life every day for the last 35 years, and she is the reason I am speaking here this morning as well. This very special person captured my imagination, and she made me, for the next 35 years, do a lot of crazy things. I immediately that summer, as a 15-year-old, flew out to the high desert in Utah, worked and camped outside for 5 weeks doing manual labor in a national park. It took us 2 days to get there by river raft and by jeep. And it was very glamorous work, morning till night. The next summer, I went to Mount Rainier in Washington State, hiked over glaciers, brought in 70-pound packs of supplies to a bridge building group of teenagers high in the mountains. Another extraordinarily exhausting summer of work. Since then, I have spoken to hundreds and then thousands of people on behalf of this woman. She made me raise $2 million. She had me become a leader within her organization, and I did actually become the first woman alone chair of the board. Every day she makes me get up and do what I do. And that is exactly what we're hoping for you to experience today. That very special woman in my life is Liz Titus-Putnam. Liz is the founder of the Student Conservation Association, and that morning in chapel had it going until this morning in your assembly room. So this is what we're hoping to do in your life, that someone today will spark your imagination and have you join an important collective effort of extraordinary women throughout the country that are working to preserve and celebrate our planet. So we do have a website, Women in Conservation at National Audubon. We encourage you to join our Facebook and our Twitter. We also have today a tab for the discussion regarding this panel. So do check that out as well and join the discussion if you will. Anyway, I'm very pleased to introduce Christopher Weaver, Mr. Weaver. He needs no introduction, but he's the chair of your science department, and he's been a great pleasure to work with, and we appreciate so much being here with you.
I'm sorry. I just want to say 2 thank yous and 1 wish for the day. So, the 1 thank you to Audubon. Without their vision and without their generosity, we wouldn't be doing this. It's a pleasure always to work with people who love what they do and who want to improve the world. And I think we've seen that across the board at Audubon. They've been incredibly generous. The second thank you goes out to the math, science, tech facilities, to Lou and Ariel, because this piece of the day and the whole day took a lot of work. And I think that one of the things we recognize is that one of the things I recognize is that nothing in this building happens without a lot of people working together. I would extend that. I would say not a lot of things of any value happen in the world without a lot of people working together. And so that leads to my 1 wish for the day, which is that we have a lot of people here. And I'm really curious to see what's going to come of this. We are going to be here this morning. We're going to have conversations, questions. We're going to do breakout sessions later based on this talk. And then the students are going to go off and they're going to build apps and build towers and do all the other things that we're doing throughout the day. And I really want you to think of this as a group endeavor, as something that you're only going to accomplish with your classmates helping you out and with these other people helping you out. So I want to turn it over to the student moderators. There will be time for questions later. So here we go.
Welcome to our very first Women in Conservation panel as part of STEM Day. I'm Jocelyn. I'm Ryan. And this is our Hewitt Library. You didn't already know. Sorry. We are so excited that you all could be here. We have a group of 4 incredibly diverse and well-respected leaders in the world of conservation. And we look forward to learning about their career paths and also the innovative and important work that they're doing to help conserve and protect the environment.
So we're going to go from your left to right. We have Elizabeth Cushman Titus Putnam, who is the founder of the Student Conservation Association. Then Dr. Susan Elbin, Director of Conservation and Science of New York City Audubon. Betty Cremens, Senior Project Officer for the Carbon Disclosure Project, and Amy Freitag, Executive Director of the New York Restoration Project.
We're going to let the panelists tell you more about themselves in a moment, but first I want to explain the structure of the hour. We will have 30 minutes of questions, which Ryan and I will be moderating. Then we'll go to the audience. Keep in mind that our audience includes not just the people in this room, but also other schools who will be joining us via webcast. And our freshman class, who is joining us remotely from just upstairs.
So, without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to the panelists and ask that they each speak for a minute or 2 about their backgrounds and interest in conservation. Ms. Putnam, let's start with you.
Okay. I'm Liz Putnam, and I'm honored to be here and honored to hear what Allison had to say, and all I can say is beware. This can happen to you. So anyway, I'm former founding president of the Student Conservation Association, and SEA engages young adults 15 years old and up. Witness young Allison over here. And in hands-on service to the land. SEA itself is now the nation's leading provider of conservation service opportunities, with now more than 64,000 young people who have participated. When I was 20 years old and a junior at Vassar was when I wrote my thesis on a proposal for a student conservation corps. And so it doesn't matter what age you are or where you come from in your life, it's what you do with your life and what you do with seeing challenges that need to be taken care of. Do it. You never know where it will lead you. And as we well know, today are many challenges confronting all of us. But I'm confident, seeing you young people, that you are up to these challenges, which we'll be discussing obviously in the panel. But I know that the difference that can be made is going to only come from people like you, like Allison, and who realize that there is work to be done. And so my saying to you is, watch out. It can take your whole life. It's taken my life, and of which I have been very pleased and honored to be still part of this organization. So thank you very much.
I'd like to thank everyone as well, and it is such an honor to be sitting up here with these wonderful women. A little bit about my background. In high school, I always loved science. It was cool, it's fun. And then in college, I had a double major. I wasn't sure if I was going to go humanities or science. But science just made sense. And I got a master's degree from Penn State University. And my program was studying birds. And I just happened to be working with a person who is known for a lot of the information about banding birds and using marked birds to answer questions in neotropical systems. So I went on from my master's degree and I got a PhD at Rutgers University, and I studied, and I'll talk about her later, she was my mentor and my role model. Studied colonial waterbirds, so waterbirds, long-legged birds. And then I needed a job. So actually when I was finishing my PhD, I also had a job. I worked at the Bronx Zoo for 13 years, and that was fun. And then I wanted to do more. I wanted to do more for conservation. And I got a job at another nonprofit organization that no longer exists, which is kind of strange. It was called Wildlife Trust, but now they do emerging diseases. But I'm not a disease person, I'm an animal person. And I was always working with birds. And I was just trying to create my program. I was a director of a bioscape program. I was always trying to direct my program toward birds. And then I met Glenn Phillips, who's the executive director of New York City Audubon, and he said, well, work for us. And I said, yes. Absolutely. So now I'm the Director of Conservation and Science at New York City Audubon, and I love what I do. I think probably you're going to see this theme repeated up here. I think that's going to be my message as well. Love what you do. If you don't love what you're doing, do something else. And so that's a brief bit of my academic background. I'm also involved in a lot of professional ornithological societies, so bird things. So I'm the president-elect of the Waterbird Society, which is an international organization that fosters science and conservation for long-legged wading birds. And I'm the chairman of the board of the Ornithological Council, which is more the policy side for ornithologists, dealing with permit issues and regulations and things like wind energy and things like that. So that's what I do, and I love it.
So my name is Betty Cremens, and I too am honored to be on this panel among such accomplished women. I obviously am still embarking on my career in environmentalism and conservation, but I'm more than happy to talk about where I've come to date and where I see the future heading as I lead myself along a path that you will soon be leading when you go into college and beyond. I've been a lifelong environmentalist as well. I've always been sort of trying to find my niche in environmentalism. While I do love trees and birds, I've never really been a very one with nature, needing to be out in nature person. I'm more, I say, a practical environmentalist. So my style of environmentalism is recycling your bottle, driving a hybrid car, building green buildings, and I think all of these different styles can fit together. So when I was choosing colleges, I chose schools based on the number of Thai restaurants in the area. So I chose to go to NYU, which had no environmental degree at the time. They do now. But that was an experience unto itself and got me into some of the more professional groups in New York City working on environmental causes and showing that, like I said, you don't really need to be out in nature to be doing things that are good for the environment. I worked a lot with Habitat for Humanity in New York City. They do a lot of green building, affordable housing, which I can talk about later. That led me to ride my bicycle across America one summer with Bike and Build. We raised money and awareness and built houses along the way. I can't think of a more environmental way to see America other than on your bicycle at 15 miles an hour. The mountains are quite large out there, let me tell you. So I came back to New York. I've had a variety of jobs and internships doing environmental science research. And then I worked for Habitat for Humanity for a year, getting corporate volunteers out on site to learn about green building and all of the ways that we were making affordable housing more healthy and more energy efficient. That led me to go to Antarctica and be help the research scientist as a carpenter. I was out on the polar plateau near the South Pole, building huts for research scientists and learning all about their science and the work that they were doing. Coming back to New York, I got my master's at Columbia in environmental policy. And I now work at the Carbon Disclosure Project, where we get corporations to disclose their climate change information to us on behalf of their largest investors. So we work with about 655 of the largest investors in the world. They have $78 trillion. On their behalf, I ask the largest companies in the world to disclose their impact on climate change and what they're doing to reduce their impact on climate change. So last year we had about 3,700 companies disclosed through us. This year I'm aiming for many more. And so I work with companies all over the world, and specifically the largest in the US, helping them figure out what this whole green thing is and how they can get better at what they're doing. So I'm happy to talk about all my experiences. I'm thrilled to be on this panel, and look forward to your questions later.
So my name is Amy Freitag, and I'm Executive Director of the New York Restoration Project, and my first bit of advice is never go forth on a panel like this. Very intimidating, and it's such an honor, and I tell you, I'm not making this up. I was on a plane yesterday coming back from Chicago, and I was reading about the history of Garden Club America, which I'm obsessed with, and I was reading about this woman named Elizabeth Titus, and how she created this unbelievable organization, and I can't believe I'm on a panel. I am not making that up. All right, I'm going to try this backwards. So I said I am the luckiest person to be running this wonderful nonprofit in New York City that is essentially the conservancy of all the places that don't have a Central Park Conservancy or a Prospect Park Alliance. So New York Restoration Project cleans and greens in all 5 boroughs. We take on vacant lots and abandoned gardens and places, and we try to bring really wonderful, green, vibrant, healthy spaces to every high-need neighborhood in New York City. So that's a fabulous thing, and one of the things we're doing is trying to plant 1 million trees with Mayor Bloomberg, which is no small feat. And we just planted we're at 562,000, about a year ahead of schedule to finish that initiative by 2017, so I'm very proud of that. I will say that I came to this career because I'd worked closely with the Bloomberg administration for the first 6.5 years of his administration. I worked as Deputy Commissioner for the New York City Parks Department, so I got to build some of the great landscapes of New York City, including the High Line and restoring Washington Square Park and many other great places. And prior to that, I worked in Philadelphia parks. I was in Philadelphia because I got 2 master's degrees at the University of Pennsylvania, one in historic preservation and one in landscape architecture. I will be a big advocate to tell you that a career path like landscape architecture can open unbelievable diverse opportunities to you. So my bent is sort of from the historic landscape perspective, but I'm very privileged now to work very much in the conservation realm. I'll say probably the reason I got on that track is that I had a mother who was very devoted to conservation early on. So early on I heard about billboards, and early on I heard about cleaning and getting rid of invasive plants. And she ended up being president of Garden Club of America, which is how that's become the research topic I'm most interested in. In 1913, a group of very powerful women got together in Philadelphia and created a national organization that is celebrating its 100th anniversary next year. And it's people like Elizabeth Titus Putman, who to me just have done unbelievable things as volunteers, women in conservation in the United States. And as a volunteer organization, it's really never gotten credit for what it's done. So part of my research is about bringing prominence to what these women have done to really shape America's landscape in the 20th century. That's it. Thank you very much.
So to begin, we're just going to start with some general questions for the 4 of you, and then we'll break off into specific questions for each of you. So our first question is, are there any specific moments or memories that you have that got you involved in your conservation studies? Like a specific one-time moment. So, this one.
Well, there were so many, but the main one was when I went to Vassar, and they had, for the first year, they had an interdepartmental conservation of natural resources. And I thought, and it had plant science, zoology, and geology. But they went on field trips, and I thought, oh, field trips, that sounds like my meat. And because I like being in the out of doors. Well, that absolutely hooked me. And so that particular course, that particular head of that department was Scott Worthing, who later became my faculty advisor and everything else for my writing my thesis and so on. But it all started because of having had that incredible opportunity to take that course. That was, it brought everything together that I believed in so strongly and didn't know I believed in it. So it was just absolutely wonderful.
Mine's a little different. I was in a laboratory in Penn State. I was talking with a colleague of mine, and he was talking about orangutans. You all know what orangutans look like, right? And this was way back before conservation was invented, I guess. And he was saying, oh my God, they're burning all the trees in Borneo, and the orangutans don't have any place to hang out. They're dying. And it's like all of a sudden I'm like, holy cow. You know, I'm thinking about birds, and I'm thinking, orangutans. We have to do something about it. So I started to pay more attention to what was going on in the habitat where these animals were living. And that was neat, you know, like I'm going to go to Borneo and study something. And I actually wound up going to Africa and studying birds in Africa. And I went into a museum to do some work and research on the skins of birds, you know, in the drawers where they keep all the old preserved birds. And the director of the museum came over to me and he said, you Americans, why don't you study your own damn birds? Oh. And I said, you know, I got very upset at first. And then I said, he was right. So put the orangutans and my own damn birds excuse me, in the United States, and that's what I'm doing.
Thank you. So mine started a little earlier. I grew up in Westchester County, and when I was young, I lived in Irvington, which is right near the Tappan Zee Bridge, and we used to go to the playground all the time in the park, and there was a beach there with a lifeguard stand that said no swimming. And I remember being 4 or 5 years old and asking my parents over and over again why there was a beach with a lifeguard stand that said no swimming. Why would you even build a lifeguard stand if you couldn't swim? And so as I got older, I learned about the Hudson River. I learned about the PCBs in the Hudson River from the GM plant that had been there for years. And that was sort of my first indication that sometimes there were big issues in the environment that were completely invisible to us, and that it took people caring and asking those questions to figure out how to solve those problems and how to change them. And the Hudson River is getting a lot cleaner. There are some amazing organizations working on that, and that sort of prompted me to think about these ideas such as climate change that are also sort of hidden to us in an immediate sense, but are huge issues that we all need to tackle and take on in our own way. So the lifeguard stand.
Wow, that's a good one. Let me say that I grew up in a house that this was a big value, and it was always a topic of conversation, cleaning up parks and doing stuff. But I think probably when it all clicked for me was in my first year of graduate work at Penn, and I studied with this really great, very, very famous landscape architect named Ian McHarg. And Ian, his whole way of designing was to basically decode the earth, starting from the bedrock geology, understanding the soils, understanding hydrology, understanding aspect, and all of these things of the topography of landscape, that generates the plants, that generates the animals. And the idea is like, oh my God, to understand in a more holistic way about how our civilization works, how our environment works, it was this wonderful integration of all of my interests at one moment. And I realized, and then you become aware of how systemically the smallest action in the landscape as a designer or somebody who builds things can have an unbelievable impact. So I think it was probably studying in that class.
Our second general question is, what changes or breakthroughs have you seen in your area of work over the course of your career? So, Ms. Putnam.
Oh yes, there have been a few changes. And number one is the role of women. And when I was at college, a few years ago, when I was at college, that my father used to say that when you graduate, you'll obviously be going and getting secretarial skills or becoming a nurse or a teacher, or getting married, and that was sort of it. And that was fine, but that was the way it was was assumed in those days. When I started out with this idea of this program, I was electrified to find when I was speaking with the Park Service out in Olympic National Park, for instance, and trying to set up, they were going to go for having a high school age program in 1957. All boys, no girls. Girls could not, would not, and certainly should not be in the wilderness area and co-ed, in the wilderness, no thank you. And so I wasn't going to be the supervisor, and needless to say, and I learned the most important thing is if you're trying to work on something, you hang on to those issues that you think are the most important, the values, whatever it is. There are certain things you can kind of, if they're willing to go for that, you kind of work it through. It was 12 years before we could get girls, allowed high school age girls, to be getting out of the program. And that was in 1969. We had two all-girls programs. And then in 1970, it became co-ed. What do you know, we all grew up. And the other comment that came forth was from somebody again in the service. And of course, it was a man's world. And the Parks, it was just a man's organization. I never thought of it that way. I mean, I grew up with you all sort of think along the line. But anyway, it was a man's organization. And I was trying to change it. And this man said, well, you're not thinking of having women as interns, are you? Because can you imagine anything funnier than a woman in a park ranger's hat? Well, I could think of things that were funny. There were interns that following year, and they went into the Park Service, and since then have been superintendents in the National Park Service. They look great in their park ranger hat. But so there have been some changes on that line. And the role of youth. When we were asked to go and speak and testify in Congress in 1970, I think it was, on behalf of Senator Scoop Jackson, trying to set up the YCC, Youth Conservation Corps, and the Young Adult Conservation Corps, and so on. And there were 3 comments that were made why there could never, ever be a conservation corps or environmental groups this way. Number 1, very strong statement. I mean, among many other reasons, but these are the 3 that I sort of remember. 1, the only work that could be done on our public lands must be done by professionals. Well, we stood up and said, excuse me, sir, but for the past 12 years, there have been high school, college, and graduate interns who have been working on public lands to evaluate X millions of dollars, whatever. Oh, the second reason why there could never be a conservation corps or such groups was because no young people would ever be interested in doing this kind of work. So for the past, there were sirs in the room basically anyway, sir, for the past years, there have been this number of participants, and there's so many others who want to get out there and be in help this country, help do this kind of work. Oh, and the third, equally strong, never statement was there never would be any girls because they couldn't, wouldn't, and shouldn't. And so by that time, we had girls not only in the high school age program, and certainly gals in the older age program as well. And so it just shows that things do improve. You have to kind of go with it, and it will come, but don't ever give up when you have a challenge. And the final thing on that is that there is now the discussion of national service, and that is something important, like AmeriCorps. And these are opportunities that are so needed. Don't ever get discouraged. It takes time, but you can, if it is important and vital, go for it. Go for your plan. Thank you.
You're tough to follow. It doesn't matter if you force it. I'm so sorry. Okay. Back to the laboratory. I'm going to talk a little bit about changes in my field in ornithology is what I think of. And there have been changes. When I first started studying birds in ornithology, we did more descriptive things, like what is that bird, what's it doing, how's it doing it, where is it? So a lot of descriptive stuff. And then through my career, we apply more technology or technological tools, and also refining the idea of using working hypotheses, so asking a question, designing a program, and then using observations to answer that question or test those hypotheses. And technologies such as DNA fingerprinting, actually I was doing DNA fingerprinting, remember with the bloody glove, who was that guy? Yeah, I mean, I was learning it then, and I knew all about that technology. And then also, though, this ties in more with what you're doing with the GIS and the landscape. So those tools help us answer questions about conservation of birds throughout the landscape. And then something you said made me remember another change that is really obvious, and I think it's the acceptance of citizen science to collect data of people. So everyone in this room could be a citizen science volunteer working for New York City Audubon, collecting data about birds in New York City. And in the early days, people would say, oh yeah, volunteers, whatever, the data aren't that reliable. But we've been able to establish protocols and collect those data so that we can use information that volunteers collect, school classes. We have a lot of interns from local colleges in the city helping us answer questions. So citizen science, young people, getting people involved at an early age as well.
It doesn't get any easier. Thank you. So as I said, my career is slightly shorter, but I have seen tremendous growth in my field as well in the last few years. When I was first at NYU in 2003, I heard of this program up at Columbia that bridged the gap between science and policy, and they were just starting it, and you learned some science, you learned some finance, you learned some policy, and it seemed like this really cool mix of all of my interests. But it was just starting out. I went to an information session and forgot about it. Fast forward a few years later, I went to another information session, and then later on that was the master's degree that I ended up doing as it got more mature. Also, like I said, at NYU when I was there was no environmental major at all. There were a few classes. You could go to the Museum of Natural History and look at the wall and learn a little bit. But I got involved trying to make the school go green, all the initiatives that they've started working on, which now they're one of the leaders in the field in that area, especially in the urban setting of cogeneration plants and bike share programs and all these things that I helped sort of get started when we were there, and this sort of niche club that we had started to supplement the fact that we couldn't take classes in this area. So now they have a major, and then I went to Columbia. They also have a lot of amazing greening initiatives going on and green building projects. And so as I've sort of gone through my schooling, I think the field has sort of developed around me. It's always sort of been my passion, but now all of a sudden I got my LEED certification, my LEED accreditation. I was always sort of into this whole idea of energy efficiency, and then all of a sudden there was a program and a test you could take to prove that you knew about this stuff. So I feel like I'm on a bandwagon, but I've always sort of been into it, and then the programs and the standardizations and the specializations and the organizations, and now the code that's requiring these types of projects in places all across the country and around the world are all starting to sort of come on board with my passion all along. At the Carbon Disclosure Project, I've been there a little over 2 years, and I've also seen incredible growth just in those 2 years. So last year we had 52% more companies disclosing than the first year when I started. So 1/3 of all companies that are taking this matter into consideration right now as we speak, because our current questionnaire is open right now, 1/3 of those weren't even thinking about this 2 years ago when I started. I hear from companies on a daily basis who say, we have no emissions, we don't know what you're talking about. And then I say, well, did you drive to work? Did you flip the lights on? Did you inhale and exhale? You have some greenhouse gas emissions. Let's calculate, let's find your electric bills, let's find your fuel use bills, let's do some calculations and figure out where your impacts are and then where your hotspots are that you can start reducing. So I talk to companies who have no idea, and then all the way up to those who have chief sustainability officers who answer directly to their CEO or their chairman of their board and are driving emissions reductions throughout their entire value chain, through all their suppliers, through all their customers and the products that they sell. So I think there's a huge progression in both the breadth of the number of companies we've gotten on board with this issue, as well as the depth to which many of those companies are taking this very, very seriously, even as we hear about all sort of the lack of policy around the issue. I talk to companies on a daily basis who are doing incredible work and taking it very seriously.
So perhaps I'm going to take what Betty just said to even a more local level here to New York City, because I would say that one of the most remarkable shifts I've seen just during my tenure working in New York City in public service and in the nonprofit sector is that we no longer look at the green parts of our city as what a friend of mine who's a landscape architect says, sort of like the sauce on the pasta that makes it all taste better. That it's not just for looks and it's not just for aesthetics, but it's actually essential infrastructure for how our city works. And it's really remarkably knuckleheaded things like the city's Office of Management and Budget letting us buy trees with capital dollars. Now that sounds really obscure. What does that mean? It actually means that the city now acknowledges that planting a tree is absolutely as important as building a sewer pipe in the city streets. And the shift that allowed the Million Trees initiative to happen was the mayor acknowledging that for every dollar the city invested annually in planting a tree, it could give back $5 to the economy. And that's in both stormwater reduction, carbon absorption, cooling the city, and doing a myriad things that wonderful trees do, including improving the appearance of communities, and improving, therefore, the tax base. So the mere thought that we now have green infrastructure in our city that is seen as essential to the survival of the city and a better investment for the city is a massive change from being just parks are there because they make us feel good and they make the city more fun to live in.
So we're going to start with the panel-specific questions. So the first one is for Ms. Putnam. How did you start the student conservation program when you were not much older than a student yourself?
Well, I was a student. So, I was a student, and actually a student is somebody, you can be any age and be a student. You just have to be wanting to learn. So you can be 90, I'm not 90, but you can be, but if you're wanting to learn and so on, you're a student. You can be 10 years old, 12 years old, 15 or whatever, and in school. I don't want to learn, I don't care. You're not a student. And so the important thing is, do you want to learn, whatever it happens to be? And so anyway, I was a student, and I was then 20 years old, and I wrote my college thesis on a proposal for a student conservation corps because I had read an article in Harper's Magazine in my junior year that said, let's close our national parks. And because they were then being loved to death, as he put it. And they had very incredibly low budgets, like before the war, World War II. They were being incredibly visited by everybody, obviously. Let's go visit our national parks. We're after the war, let's go. So, and there were very few rangers, old men basically, but working in the park. They were living in tar paper shacks built by the CCC before the Second World War, temporary. And yet these were not temporary, they were living in these leaky things. And they had lousy living conditions. Their basic work seemed to be which way to the nearest latrine. They didn't have bathrooms in those days, latrines. Clean up trash. They weren't doing any interpretive work. They couldn't. There wasn't time. So we said, close these parks. These parks like Yellowstone, Yosemite, and the others. These are gifts for the future. They don't belong to us to destroy. These have been given to us, the citizens of this country, to pass on to the next generations and the next generations. And he said, until we get the funds to get this done, let's close them, protect them. And I thought there was another way. I thought, having read the CCC about what they had done, why couldn't there be students, people like myself, who would be willing to do, didn't know what they needed to do, but we could go out and help, do something, so that these men, obviously because they were men then, that these men could go do what they've been trained to do. So that was sort of how I got going as a student, and in writing this thesis at college, which went on from there.
So what kind of impact does ornithology have on society as a whole?
I should ask them. Do you people pay attention to birds out there? The study of birds, just the beauty of birds. That's a really good question. I think I'm going to just speak briefly to one of the programs that we have in New York City Audubon, which is the issue of bird collisions with glass in buildings. And it's something that before I started with Audubon, I really didn't have a clue about. And if you're walking down the streets, you may see, especially this time of year, because this is migration, so birds are moving from their wintering grounds to their breeding grounds, and then later in the fall they'll go back the other way. You may find a dead bird or so on the sidewalk. Have you ever seen one of those? And you think, oh gee, isn't that a shame that there's a dead bird on the sidewalk? But when you think about it, that's one dead bird on one sidewalk in one city along a huge system called the Atlantic Flyway, which is what we use to describe that passage between north and south that these birds do. And so motivating people about that one dead bird, but the one dead bird could actually, and we firmly believe that it is a population problem. So these common birds that we see now flying into windows, dying, their population is going to be decreased, and we may not see them anymore. So how do you get people excited about ornithology with a dead bird? And we can. And we talked to LEED certified architects and landscapers, and talking about just how do you present a building and a landscape so that a bird sees it and doesn't fly into a window. And I won't go into all the details because I could talk about this for hours and hours and hours. But I think that even in just that one instance, we can use ornithology, and we need to learn more, actually, even just the basic stuff. So if people are interested in basic science, pure science, how do birds see? We don't really know everything yet. You'd think we would by now, but we don't. So just all those basic information about how birds see, about how you can design buildings so that birds see them, how you can plant the landscape so that birds use it without flying into buildings. I think that is just one example of how ornithology is galvanizing for the world. I'm a little biased. I see the world through birds.
Ms. Cremens, our nation is so dependent on fossil fuel. When looking at possible solutions for the cut down of our usage of fossil fuels, what other resources are plentiful enough to substitute that void? Or will we have to begin to change our culture?
Wow, that's another fabulous question. I don't know if I can answer it, but I can give you my opinion and take a stab at it. So as I mentioned, we work with 3,700 companies all over the world who are all reporting their greenhouse gas emissions and their greenhouse gas emissions reduction projects. And I believe 700 and something of the projects that they disclosed this past year had a payback in under 3 years, which means I think an alcohol company said they invested $7 million in installing solar panels on the roof of one of their facilities, and it had a 6-month payback. So 6 months later, they were already saving money on their energy bills and had already paid off the whole cost of the solar panels. I can't imagine walking into a board and saying, hey, we need to spend $7 million on this project. But if you can prove that payback, you have a very, very good argument. And to me, that sort of takes environmentalism and the idea of, say, of birds and trees and all these important things and sort of brings it to the boardroom and gets it being taken seriously. So I think to answer your question, there are a plethora of technologies out there that can help us, both on the electricity side. 49% of electricity in the U.S. is made by coal, and it's something we don't really talk about very much. We talk about foreign oil and all these other issues, but coal is a really big issue in the U.S., and it's one of the most noxious ways to make electricity. In New York State, we don't use as much coal because we don't have any here. We use more nuclear and more hydro, but that's a big issue. And so I think for the electricity side, there's solar, there's wind, there's all sorts of ways to create electric. On the fuel side for driving your vehicles, there's also many new solutions. I think most of the technologies that are probably going to power all of our lives haven't been invented yet, and it's up to all of you to get into engineering and science and start to help to create them. I heard Obama say an all of the above energy policy recently, and I don't know, I don't want to talk about politics, but I think all of the above is the best way to think about energy because we've sort of been stuck on a few types up until now, and I think there are so many ways that we can create electricity and fuel for vehicles that that we shouldn't be stuck on anything in the past. I think there's so many different ways, and companies are the ones causing the problems, and they're the ones that can be the solutions, in my opinion.
Okay, so
Ready.
we're running short on time.
We'd like to ask some questions that we've gotten online and on Twitter, and then we're going to open it up to the audience. I know you guys have some great questions too, but we'd like to make it a little more interactive.
I know, I get the first one.
Sorry.
Questions, thanks, guys. All right.
But the first one is for you. So the first one is from our online chat, and it says, it feels like NYC is already extremely crowded. Where do you find space for these green spaces you're talking about? Can you tell us a little bit about one of the projects you're working on now?
Oh, that's such a great question. It does feel really crowded, but guess what? We are losing tree canopy faster than we can plant it. So it turns out a lot of the green spaces that are able to be greened with trees, and I'll just start with trees, are single-family homes in neighborhoods like Brooklyn and Queens, and places where maybe communities where people can't afford to go out and buy a bunch of trees for their yard. So one of the things we're really doing is working with local community-based organizations to get trees out to the communities that need them most, and they can't afford to plant them. Off the charts, if you do a GIS analysis of New York City, you'll see those are the properties that most need trees in New York City. I'd like to talk about one project we're working on in particular, because one of the things that our unbelievable founder, I can't believe I haven't mentioned her yet, talking about a woman in conservation, Bette Midler, when she, in the end of the Giuliani administration, helped purchase a bunch of what were vacant lots to the city, were taken up by community gardeners, and she, among Trust for Public Land and a lot of other great environmental organizations, got together to purchase what was seen as vacant and underutilized property and protected it in perpetuity for gardeners. There's a garden we're working on right now in the Gowanus section of Brooklyn, and it is a fairly conventional community garden. We have wonderful sponsors that are helping us renovate it, but we're going to make that garden become part of the stormwater system of Brooklyn. We're actually going to use that garden to recharge what is a real problem in that neighborhood, which is stormwater. That block floods all the time. And this garden will become its own little stormwater sink and stop about 15,000 gallons of water going into the combined sewer outflow system of the city, which talk about really exciting stuff, the sewers of New York. But the problem is, when it rains a lot in New York, you can't go swimming in Long Island. And that's because of the combined sewer outflow. So if every green space in New York City could start doing double duty, not only making itself a wonderful place for its local community, but start recharging the stormwater system, we wouldn't be having to build hundreds of millions of dollars of new water treatment plants in the city. So it's called the Carroll Street Garden. Check it out on our website. It's going to be a spectacular site. And it's going to have a great place for birds. A lot of pollinators, a lot of birds.
Okay, so our next question from the chat is for Ms. Cremens, and it says, you say you got started by trying to make your school go green. What are some things you think we should do to make our school take part in this environmental movement? And this is from one of our freshman advisories, so.
Fabulous, thank you. That's a great question. I think there are so many good examples now that I don't know if I'm the authority to speak to all of them, but my esteemed panelists say we should plant trees.
Like trees.
They're only halfway to 1 million. So
Got a lot more trees to get rid of.
I think there's some empty spaces, right? We can find some. We'll dig up some pavement, right? So yeah, I think there's some great organizations helping schools coordinate in their efforts to go green nowadays. I don't know if I like that phrase, but I think there's facility things you can do where you get your HVAC system to run better, you get the people who operate the building to operate it at its highest potential. And those are things you don't see, but you'll probably feel more comfortable in the building. There's more aesthetic things you can do with windows and water fountains and all those things. There's behavioral things you can do, which I'm sure you hear about on a daily basis and probably have signs up all over to shut the lights off and recycle. And then there's things that you can take home with you as you go home and bring things home from school and integrate it into your daily lives. And then there's the upstream side where your school probably purchases a lot of things and you can use the purchasing power of your school to make changes. So at CDP, I deal with our supply chain program a lot. I work with the suppliers to many large organizations, and some giant organizations like Walmart and PepsiCo are requiring that their suppliers all reduce their impact. So even with your school, you can use all the paper you purchase and the food and all of the things that your school buys throughout the year to make better choices, which will then create a ripple effect throughout all of your suppliers in New York City and beyond. So there's a variety of different levels you can take action. Just get started.
Perfect. So now we'd like to open up the floor to the audience for any questions. So, just stand. No, just yeah.
This question's for Ms. Clemens. The Carbon Disclosure Project, according to your website, aims to tackle climate change primarily systematically, honing in on the shortcomings and problematic elements of the global economic system. So in your attempts to mobilize for change in a system that's not necessarily all that friendly to change, I don't think, what and who has been your most formidable, obstacle or opponent?
That's a good question. Yeah, I would say the opponent is complacency, and the other opponent is quarterly gains. So we work with investors. We work, like I said, with 655 investors, and we use their collective purchasing power to help corporations realize that they need to take action on this. We work mostly with pension funds and with groups that can invest their money in a more long-term fashion. So they're looking at risk, right? So if they're investing in an energy company that isn't looking at their climate change impacts and isn't looking at how they're going to be in business in the future as weather patterns change, as regulation changes, that's probably not a good investment. So we work with those who have a sort of more long-term horizon, because climate change has immediate effects, but it also has many long-term detrimental impacts. I would say that we've had incredible success in that realm, but I think that the thing holding us back is the focus on short-term success and short-term gains and sort of constant media attention that wanes. So it's a more long-term issue that isn't, you can't really take a picture of climate change. Birds, trees are very photogenic, and it's great. It's easy to sort of get behind something you can see. Climate change, we hear about these big scary things. We hear about hurricanes and tornadoes, but until it hits home, it's harder to sort of understand how your light switch affects that stuff. So that's a long-winded answer to your very good question. Share the questions with my panelists.
All right, so we have one more online question to ask. Sorry, I just need to read it from here. This is from another one of our freshman advisories to Dr. Elman. You said you worked, you said you worked at the Bronx Zoo. So how has your field work affected your perspective on animal habitats in zoos?
Ooh, these are really good questions. I no longer work for zoos. I think the role of zoos is really important for education, and the Bronx Zoo is an outstanding, stellar example of trying to present birds in their natural habitat, although it's artificially created. And I think without zoos, a lot of people wouldn't see these birds. And so zoos are they're facilitating birds to be ambassadors for their wild counterparts. But zoo exhibits, we stopped calling them cages a long time ago. Zoo exhibits are created and designed so that the animals feel comfortable. They feel at home. They breathe, they move around, they do the natural behavior, so people can see that. And then some of it is window dressing so that the people feel like they're in the habitat as well. But zoos are really important, and exhibitry has advanced a lot in the last 40 years.
Okay, thank you. So,
should we have time for one more?
One more online. So why don't we open up to the audience? Anyone else?
How much of conservationism is dedicated to changing policy, and how much of it is dedicated to changing the attitude towards that policy? I'm sure it's arguable which is more effective, but on a day-to-day basis, do you work more towards changing not necessarily governmental policy, but maybe company policy, or on a policy on a more local scale? Or do you work more sort of communicating with individuals to encourage them to, despite the fact that they can get away with, using coal and stuff like that, to, do the more environmental thing?
I can start. I'll be brief. I'll start. We can start.
Let's give a list.
She's hard to follow.
That's the last question. We're
I was just going to say soundbite, and then she can follow. We do both. We bring the information to people because we're a grassroots organization. So it takes people to vote to be the constituency, and then that affects the legislature. And in Audubon, we have the whole policy department, and those people know how to speak to the legislators, and they're up on what's happening, and they communicate that information to us, and then we share it with our members.
To me, an answer to that question is, I want to share a quick story with you that might show where I'm coming in from. Some years ago, I met a man who said anyone working for the environment is destroying this country. When I asked him why, and what did he mean? And he said, oh, well, anyone working for the environment is trying to set up rules and regulations, and he was pumping his rather ample chest and saying that it's my rule, it's my rights to do whatever I want to do when I want to do it, and no one can stop me. And I said, do you think we're having any problems? Acid rain, ozone layer depletion, or something like that? Or do you think it's just media hype? And he looked at me and he said, little lady, got my attention. And he said, little lady, I don't give a damn, but that's what he said. I don't give a damn. Because he said, I'm not going to live long enough to care. And I said, do you have any kids? And he said, sure, 2 daughters. What about them? I said, well, what about them? And he said, well, that's going to be their problem. And then he went on to say that he said he hoped that I heard everything that he had to say, because there were a lot of people who thought like he did. And I said to him, everything was very polite, and I said to him, first of all, I thanked him for having been so honest. And I said, I promise you I've heard everything that you've had to say, but I further promise you I will share what you have had to say with as many people as I can. Because what he was saying was not only going to destroy this country and this, but the planet as well. And so I share that, because when you were asking where does conservation or whatever it is start, it starts with all of us. It's our spirit. It's, do we feel that it is important to care about this earth? Do we feel it's important to care about our community? Excuse me, sometimes I get a little leaky. Anyway, it's one of those things, my problem. And so I'm just sharing that with you. It's each and every one of us who makes an impact on this earth, good, bad, or indifferent. And therefore, it's up to each and every one of us to, if we want to be like that guy and his buddies, you don't have to be. You can do something about it. And that, to me, is what the encouraging, exciting thing is. It's working from the heart to the soul, and that's how we work on